This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, and we've got some huge updates about the coronavirus today. And really, I think at this stage, it really seems like the panic is really more so of the pandemic right now. I mean, we've got entire countries being put on quarantine, like Italy. We have entire industries starting to crumble, like the tourism and travel industry. And of course, there's economic whirlwind in the markets. The Dow is down, oil is down, stocks are down. It almost seems like everything is spiraling out of control. Or is this exactly what the powers that ought not to be had in mind all along? Well, joining us on the line to help us understand specifically what's happening to the financial markets in regards to the coronavirus is our friend Lior Gantz. Wealthresearchgroup.com is the website. Lior, thanks for joining us here today, man. We've got so much going on with the coronavirus right now. It's almost hard to wrap our heads around it. And I want to get your views on what's happening in the markets. The Dow is down, stocks are crashing, oil is down. But before we get into that, maybe we can just get your views on whether or not you think that the panic right now is being a little bit overblown, because it seems that when the World Health Organization announced that this was a global pandemic, there were really only a handful of deaths at the time and a few cases around the world. Of course, this has spread since, but the media has really run with this and ramped up the fear state to the point where we're now having a run on toilet paper. So what the heck do you think is going on with this, Lior? I know it's hard because there's so much misinformation on both sides of the matter, but what do you think about the current panicked state of the people when it comes to the coronavirus at the hands of the mainstream media reporting on it?
Yeah, so literally 5 minutes before we did this interview, recorded this interview, the World Health Organization now announced that it's a global pandemic. Before that, they said it's an epidemic, and then they said the epidemic is spreading, but now they officially declared it a pandemic. And I think that's important because of one main thing. This gives legitimacy to countries, as you said, that have not panicked yet, that are not ill yet. Now the politicians have the best excuse ever to go wild with this. So I think that's what you're going to see tomorrow. So we're doing this interview on the 11th. I will tell you 100%, on the 12th, you will see other countries that have, 100 infectious carriers or people that have the disease starting to clamp down on gathering, schools, industry. They're going to close down ports, etc. Because now it's official. And now you don't want to be the politician that said, nah, it's the flu. We're fine. And you want to cover your ass. So you're going to do the worst case scenario and let it run. And this is just paralyzing, decapitating to industries, just decapitating to industries, Dan. If you're asking if it's overblown, look, the medical industry will cite the fact that on the level of infectiousness, this is highly infectious. This spreads like bees from flower to flower. This is a really problematic disease. It's not a joke. But the minimalists will say, hey, most people have recovered from it. This has a 2% mortality rate, and you need to have a pre-existing issue, and you need to be old, etc. Right, older, to really have a problem with it. So that maximalist minimalist clash is definitely there. You even see Trump tweeting that, hey, people, 30,000 people die every year from the seasonal flu. We have 25 deaths here in the entire United States. Relax, think it over, right? So you have all of these things going on right now from both sides of the aisle, and it's hard to tell. But what can you look at, right? So if you go to wealthresearchgroup.com/virus, for example, we went over this in detail, and we showcased how China is almost back to normal. China, the origin of all of this, is getting back to normalcy. The quarantines are alleviated. They're getting opened again. Starbucks, which had to close out of its 4,500 branches, it had to close 80% of them, so about 3,700. Now they're back at 90% capacity. I mean, this is a great sign that, hey, this is manageable, right? They didn't have to quarantine the entire country. You know the size of China, right? It's like, I think in landmass, it's one of the top 10 biggest countries on the planet. They didn't have to quarantine everyone. They quarantined a region. And they did a lot of tests, and look, it's over, right? In most countries, the doctors tell you sleep well, eat well, and wash your hands frequently, and you'll be fine. So definitely on that side, you don't need to have a vaccine to which is 12 to 18 months away at this point to be protected from this, right?
Well, I know at this stage in the game, in places like Japan, they're closing down schools, I believe. I mean, we just had, for example, in Austin, Texas, the South by Southwest, the very famous music festival
canceled.
Canceled, you know? So people are taking proactive measures. Now, you mentioned how these world leaders are going to deal with these things, and a little bit about what Trump was tweeting. You know, considering what you see coming tomorrow and in the next few days, how do you foresee him handling this moving forward in a way that is not going to upset too many Americans?
Great question. Look, this is a report that I just published for your show specifically. If you go to wealthresearchgroup.com/checkmate, this is a report all about Trump, what he's going through right now, because this person is not sleeping a second. And he's doing a lot of things, a lot of maneuvers, not just because of the coronavirus, but think of this way. It's an election year, and that has a lot to do with how he decides on things. The economy 3 weeks ago, Dan, was at all-time highs. He was on Twitter every day. Spend your money wisely, folks. Where everyone's working here. Everything is up in the air, all excited about stocks, right? And now there's a 20% decline in stocks. This is trillions of dollars, right? So that's his big thing, and it's over. Then the second thing is gatherings, rallies. Is bread and butter to win the elections. Done. That's over. There's even talks, Dan, about postponing the elections because people have to go to the ballots and lick things and whatever, right? So that's also up in the air. Now, what he's done are three main things that he's done, and then let me talk a little bit about what I think some of his mindset is going through. So one thing that he's done, he's got a sacrificial lamb, right? Who is spearheading this entire thing for Washington? It's Mike Pence, not him. He appointed the vice to do that so that later, if this thing goes berserk, you can say, Mike, thank you, step down, let the grown man handle this right now and be the hero, right? You remember Bush standing on the rubbles of like the 9/11 and the fire, and he's saying to the firefighters, you're the heroes of New York, blah, blah, and then you know the famous picture when he's in the helicopter looking at Katrina and trying to be presidential. So that's obviously something that his advisors are obviously saying. They're telling him, Donald, you have to be the champion of the people. You have to be the hero of this. You can come out on top of this politically. I think personally, there's a person who was the most loved person in New York City and then went $1 billion in the hole and famously said about a homeless guy that he has $1 billion more than he does, and then restructured the entire bankruptcy and went on to own some of the best real estate in the world. So he's a capitalist. And so rather than just go and bail out entire industries, he wants all these CEOs to come to the White House and talk and see what in a capitalistic system can be done. What are you thinking about? What are you doing? How can we do this in a manner that's market productive and not just putting a blanket of $1 trillion that is going to be tacked onto our deficits and taxpayer money going down, added to our children's and children's children, etc. So he brought all these CEOs. He's looking at who's vulnerable: the airline CEOs, the cruise ship CEOs, the banking sector, oil CEOs, pharmaceuticals. So I think that's secondly. He's trying to tell people, I'm not your mother goose. let's work this, let's figure this out. Let's calm down and figure this out. Because of his personal fortitude towards bankruptcies and crisis events. And then thirdly, I think what he really wants secretly is he wants to postpone the big stimuli until the 17th, because the 17th is the FOMC meeting, the Federal Reserve meeting. And I think what has he wanted for the longest time? He wanted zero rates from the Fed, right? Well, if he waits, right? If he waits just 6 more days, then the Fed will have to do it. Because could you imagine being Jerome Powell and not cutting rates substantially right now?
Mm-hmm.
The entire country will come down on you and say, why? Why didn't you cut rates? We need easing. We need economic activity to be healthy. And literally right now, cutting interest rates is obviously very beneficial because it unfreezes credit markets, because otherwise banks don't want to lend. And obviously there's many distressed industries that need loans, that need to survive, to even to pay employees, right? When you're on leverage and you're a hotel chain right now, you're in big shit.
Yeah.
So I think that's what he's doing. He's waiting. The Fed will cut rates substantially, I think by 75 basis points. So going from 1.25 to 0.5, very close to zero rates again. And then I think he'll come out, and I think that's what the markets will cheer, a coordinated event. The Democrats, in my opinion, are trying to capitalize on this entire situation and to box him in. If he does a big bailout, they'll say, hey, he's no better than us. He's a Republican maybe, but look at how he bailed out Wall Street at the expense of the little guy. If he does nothing, then they'll say, hey, this guy has said this is a flu the entire time. He was wrong, dead wrong. He failed the American people. So they're going to try and box him, and they're already pressurizing him. New Jersey is the obviously a very Democratic-prone state that has put the National Guard on alerts, like the army on the streets, and declared a state of emergency. These Democrat-centered states are going to try and pressure him as much as possible. And he's going to capitalize on this on the other hand. He's going to say, hey, put politics aside right now. The whole country needs to get unified. And usually in these sort of crises, history says that presidents get reelected because the people don't want a change of leadership in the middle of a big situation. So that's working for him. In terms of where the markets can go, Dan, look, the markets can go down 40 to 50%. There's nothing that says they won't. Even on earnings, the Nasdaq and the Dow and the S&P 500 still can go down by 15 to 20% from here, and they're already down approximately 20%. So if the bubble deflates all the way to meet earnings, so the fundamentals meet reality and trading activity, we can still see a 20% decline. This is big stuff. People will lose trillions, especially if you're a retiree and you plan to retire in the next 2, 3, 4 years. That's going to postpone your plans. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll get back to the all-time highs that we saw 3 weeks ago for 4 to 5 years here. This is not going to be a V-shaped recovery where everything just explodes back higher. But on the flip side, the good things that are happening, the opportunities that are happening are, one, low oil prices are very bad for oil companies and for banking that lend to the oil industry. But for the rest of us, Dan, obviously the perfect world is a free energy world, right? It drops that entire cost from our lives. So shipping is cheaper. Airlines are cheaper. Everything is cheaper with low oil prices. So that's good. Secondly, bond yields have just plummeted. And could you imagine being right now a first-time home buyer? You can book a 30-year mortgage at like what, 1.5%, 2%, even less. So this can really spark a lot of people that are renting or living in their parents' house. I'm talking about a quarter of America, millennials, that can start heading out of the house with these sort of stimulative environments. So,
Mhm.
you have to look at all angles here. I do think that the worst is not behind us. There's
Right.
going to be a second wave um, because we don't know yet. China, after China, we thought it was a 2% mortality rate. Now in Italy, it's looking like a 5% mortality rate, which is huge, where millions of people are infected. It's huge, the difference between 2 and 5%.
Mhm.
So you just don't know, and you have to be weary of these corrupt countries. Now, Italians are not. I love Italy, but their politicians are corrupt, and what they did with closing down the entire country was basically what they did was their politicians said, "Okay, we'll close down the entire country. The IMF or the World Bank will bail us out using other countries' taxpayer money," and then I can tell you probably 80% of that bailout money will not go to where it needs to go.
For sure.
So be wary of these politicians and these states of emergency because they want the funds.
Yes.
Um, that's important to understand. This fear mongering is it's a lot of money being
Well,
made. I know obviously the media industry, Dan, is capitalizing on this, but
yeah.
politicians can really rape on this sort of stuff.
Well, there's a lot of money to be made here, and considering that we do know things are going to get worse before they get better, and we do know that in all of these markets, I mean, what are people to do at this stage in the game when they're thinking, okay, how the heck do I protect my assets now? I mean, is Bitcoin the answer? Is gold the answer? I mean, as far as I know, this pandemic isn't affecting, the hashing rate of Bitcoin, for example. So what are some of the things people ought to be looking forward thinking here in the midst of this really starting to take off? What should they be doing today?
Yeah. Look, obviously, I'm not giving any personal advice, but I can tell you that it has to do with three things. One, your experience level. Secondly, your tolerance for big swings, and then your timeline. If you're looking at this from you're about 40, I'm 35. If you're looking at it from our age, uh, markets recover. Even the Great Depression took 7 years to break even from the bottom to top. So from the bottom, the depths, the worst part of the Great Depression, the stock market, it took 7 years and it recovered. So if you're 40 and you're investing with the idea that, hey, I need the money at 60 or 65, then this is less of a concern to you. You should not be, personally, I am not liquidating my portfolio because of this. Um, what are some proactive things that someone that's my age is doing is, hey, there's a huge discount opportunity. How do I raise cash actually? How do I get my cash levels up? So some very sophisticated things that I've done in the past in order to prepare for crisis is I have a life insurance policy that I can borrow against and I'm still covered. So if I have I don't know, $250,000 in a cash value in a whole life insurance policy, I can now take it, borrow it, still stay insured, and I can use those funds in the markets to capitalize on opportunity. Obviously, with low interest rates, you can do many things, and that's part of the reason I think a lot of institutions are not buying because they're saying, look, what's the rush? Let all these retail people that have no clue how markets work, let them sell everything. Let them sell their Coca-Cola shares along with their small cap stuff because the little guy thinks Coca-Cola is going away tomorrow. And then we'll come in, the institutions, the big guys, and we'll borrow at zero rates and leverage and make a killing. So that's one thing I think a lot of people are thinking about, raising cash levels. How can I raise my cash level? What can I do right now? And that's one of the reasons gold isn't just going off to the moon, because some people that have bought gold 2-3 years ago and have made 40-50%, they're saying, okay, the coronavirus is as scary thing as we'll get. Therefore, whatever gold is at right now, I don't see a whole lot of upside for it in theory, right? That's their thesis. Because my God, what can make things worse in order to make people buy even more, right? So they're selling, taking profits, and waiting. So that's one thing that's definitely happening right now. Um, and so it depends on your timeline. Like I said, what is your timeline? Do you need the money in 2-3 years? You should do stuff differently than I do. If you need the money 20 years from now, you should consider doing stuff that's more opportunistic than protective. What is your timeline? That's one thing. Do you need the money? Is it your consumption money that you're basically dabbling with, or is it money that you've set aside for investing? Secondly, your experience level. So if you're an experienced person, you can do more sophisticated stuff in the options market, for example. One thing, Dan, that's amazing, and I've done in the past and done in 2008, for example, is called a put option. I'll give you just a quick example of it. A put option means that if there's a business that you love to own a piece of, that you want to buy shares of, let's say it's one of the best businesses in the world in your opinion, Apple. You love the price right now, but you think, hey, there could be worse times ahead, but you do love the price right now. You can do a put option. A put options is basically getting paid by someone else who currently owns shares of Apple. He pays you for the right to sell you his shares at a later date for a fixed price. Now, if the markets don't topple over and Apple doesn't fall by another 10% or something, then that option never gets exercised. You get to keep the money that he paid you in advance, that insurance money that he paid you, and you never own the stock. So that's called a put option. And in 2008, I looked at companies like Hershey's bars, companies that are very safe, that WD-40 everyone has in the house, right? That product is not going away because of 2008, right? But people were willing to sell it as if the business was going bankrupt. When you create put options on those type of businesses, most of the time they never get filled, because these companies always have buyers that are saying, hey, let's be real. This is Coca-Cola we're talking about, or whatever else, or McDonald's we're talking about. So that's more sophisticated. Obviously, I'm not saying you should do this if you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But we do discuss this on the wealthresearchgroup.com newsletter, where I share more of stuff that I'm doing all the time in the newsletter. So that's secondly, and that has to do with your experience level. So you have your timeline, and experience level. If you look at a chart of the S&P 500 and you just do max, and you look at like 100-year chart, you look at stuff like 1987 and 2001 and 2008 or the Great Depression, and they really look like these tiny drawbacks in a huge bull market. Because if you put your money in stocks 100 years ago and gave it to your son, I think in 100 years, every dollar that was invested has turned into more. Every dollar that was invested has turned into, over $100,000 or $150,000, including dividends. So we've had the bloodiest century in the 20th century, the bloodiest century ever, 2 world wars, etc. But companies have flourished. There's a great book, one of the classic books of investing is called Triumph of the Optimists, one of Warren Buffett's favorite books. And it basically goes over a study by 2 people of all of the emergency situations that happened in the 20th century and how the world didn't end in the end of it, right? And what stocks fared. So experience level, timeline, and then tolerance level. Some people just cannot look at their brokerage accounts and see this stuff happening to them. And that comes into play. What is your mental discipline? Are you able to convince yourself that, I need to think rationally here? Maybe this company specifically is vulnerable, but maybe this company isn't. Maybe this company will actually capitalize on this while its competitors are getting moved out of the game, and it will gain market share. You need to really think about these things. So, and that has to do with your tolerance level. So I think those 3 things are what people need to think about. But underline it all, like you said, diversification, more than any other factor in the performance of individual investors, defines your success rate over time. Stock picking, fine, you may be a genius at stock picking, but if you look at the general cut of people, diversification is the number one risk mediator. If you have money in cash and in stocks and in real estate and in private lending and in precious metals and in cryptocurrencies, etc., then you have a lot going for you. Re- Remind yourself that what's happening in these markets, in the stock market, is a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's very liquid. So, for example, if real estate, if your house, if you could buy and sell it that easily, you would assume that many people would have done that, right? It's illiquid. So many people are not saying, hey, my house is probably going down by 20% because of this coronavirus, right? Oh my God, I need to sell the house. People are not doing that. Why are they doing that with stocks? Because remember, what is a stock? When you own a piece of American Express and you rush to your computer and sell American Express, what you're basically telling yourself is, my God, American Express is a bad business right now. I don't want to own it. So you need to think about it in that context, and that's important. So real estate is good that way because it's very illiquid and the gyrations are less. And then in terms of like experience in this in the real estate market, 2008 has revolutionized the real estate industry. Even as a part-time, small-time investor, you can now open an account with companies like Fundrise or Equity Multiple, etc. These companies are crowdfunding platforms where you can buy into commercial real estate that gets leased to Walgreens and CVS, or you can own government offices that are being rented to Washington, or hospitals, stuff that 10 years ago did not exist. As a average person, you would have said, hey, real estate is out of reach for me. I can't buy a single family house. I don't have the money. But now you can own self-storage units, etc., by putting $5,000 in there, $10,000 in there, and just own a partial part of it, and you get a quarterly distribution, 6 or 8 or 10%. Some stuff, some investments give you, and it's these are companies that have thousands of investors in them, even institutional investors in them, and have very reputable management teams and reputations. It works. You know what I mean? It's being done, and it's all over the place. And then you don't have the volatility of a stock market. So there's definitely options and opportunities out there.
Yeah, well, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of food for thought there, some excellent advice. Maybe the real question at this stage in the game is, did you invest in any of these toilet paper companies?
Well, actually, so Kimberly-Clark, which actually gained from this disaster, is a personal holding of mine. I don't believe it will keep outperforming. It's not like it's a super high growth company. It's a very defensive stock. That's why I own it for defensive purposes. But yeah, you saw these companies like Costco or Clorox going nuts. So you got that. Obviously, you will have that. But I think the big opportunities are in companies that have unjustifiably gone down by 40 to 50% in their blue chip companies. So not these arbitrary companies that may go away. I think that's where people need to start looking. But I also think in terms of like your career, okay, in terms of like what you can do personally, there are opportunities. The coronavirus may end up being over by the summer because of high temperatures. Who knows, right? But the paradigm shifts are there. People are going to think differently about sanitation, about hygiene, about gatherings, sporting events. Many things will change. And I don't have to tell you that any CEO in America right now is saying to himself, do I want to explain to my board of directors that I haven't done anything with my supply chain after the coronavirus? So you can imagine how many companies are going to move back to the United States or just diversify out of China. And if you're either an investor, an entrepreneur, business person, you need to think about these things, because in your locality, it may be that the next plant opens up and you want to be there to, as a realtor, as a other type of, profession. What can you do? Because these times of opportunity, CEOs are going to spend billions relocating their supply chains, um, consulting about new tax advantages when they move countries. This is a big deal. This is not something that is just going to be, there was Corona, now there isn't. This is
Right.
staying with us, and probably this is going to be something that's not going to be wiped out of the planet. So in next year, you might say, "Oh, I'm not feeling it. I just caught the corona for a few days," like you caught the flu.
Right.
It is up in the air now. So who knows? And obviously, pharmaceutical companies are going to make a fortune on this, selling us vaccines,
Right.
anti this, anti that. I think that's important. On a personal level, I think sleep well, eat very well, wash your hands frequently. Um, I like to stay away from older family members, because I don't want to be responsible if something happens. So I
Right.
limit some visitations here and there right now. Actually, my parents self quarantined themselves because my father is on dialysis and he has diabetes, and um, he in soccer, we say he's already been given the yellow card. He's halfway on this planet and halfway not. So he's
Right.
being careful, and obviously my mother is being careful right along with him.
Yeah.
So on a personal level, you need to think about this. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe this is not a flu, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. But
Yeah.
I was outside today in the beach with my little daughter, and I went with her to on a bike ride, and I literally have not changed anything about my routine yet. So also important to put this in your personal perspective of
Yes.
where you want to, how do you want to live your life.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think that's important too, is to just not be overblown with the panic by the mainstream media, but just do what you think is right at this stage in the game. And if that involves preparing by getting, a stockpile of food and water and an
Yeah,
emergency stuff, great. There's
yeah.
nothing wrong with doing that. It's not
There's
not
no
bad.
downside to it. Yeah, there's no downside to it. You'll just have more water in the house.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's a smart thing that I think a lot of people ought to be doing anyways. And
Exactly.
yeah, and you've given us a really lot to think about in terms of the markets and how people can protect themselves and prepare and maybe even financially benefit and stay away from big problems. So I think that's important to think about, which is why I wanted to have you on today. You bring these kind of things to the table that not a lot of people are maybe considering right now. So I think it's important. You have wealthresearchgroup.com/virus, which is a really comprehensive report on everything we've discussed today. Where else can people go to learn about what you've been covering in regards to the coronavirus?
I think that just the best way to stay updated with everything we're doing is the newsletter. If
Okay.
you go to the main site, wealthresearchgroup.com, and you sign up for the free newsletter on the homepage, we publish 3 times a week. It's all comprehensive. My model is basically I read about 6 to 7 hours a day worth of research from various platforms, and then I have my contacts in many countries. I've traveled to over 45 countries. I've been blessed and fortunate to do that, and through links to CEOs of companies and other networks that I have to do with. Some are paid networks, mastermind groups, etc. I try to condense everything into a 5-minute to 10-minute read, where it would take the average person, like I said, 6 to 7 hours and 20, 25 phone calls to do that. So that's, I think, the value of the newsletter, and I do it because I want to make sure that that people just have another perspective, because, as you know, Associated Press, Reuters, it's all one beast.
Yeah.
And that beast isn't looking out for your interest. I am coming from a starting point or a point of view that, hey, in my life, my father went bankrupt when I was 13. I started working and hustling and working hard. By the time I was 16, I saved money and actually got my parents to sign a waiver when I was a minor to start investing. This was like 3 months after the dot-com bubble burst, and so it was an opportune time. I was lucky and fortunate in that way, and just started to devour books and became an entrepreneur and all that kind of stuff. So I'm making sure that I want to give that perspective to people. That look, with a lot of sacrifice, because I didn't have my 20s. My 20s, the age of 20 and the age of 30, it's if I close my eyes, it's all one big work week. And it's true. I've said no to many things. I sacrificed, and I just think if people understand that capitalism has a lot to do with sacrifice and with putting yourself in the right place and doing things, that we will all have a better time on this planet. And I would get to meet people like you halfway around the world, Squamish, and I'm in Israel right now. I've been to Squamish actually. Actually took a Cessna plane when I was there. You have a very amazing little airport there, and flew around the Whistler Mountains, and beautiful place. And yeah, I think that's just my way of putting other people into that mix.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's really our goals here as well, is to kind of bring that other perspective that they're not necessarily getting from the mainstream, and to kind of provide some solutions, and not just to scare everyone into rushing out and doing things, but really to just provide some solutions. So I would encourage people to check out the links, subscribe to the newsletter. I'm subscribed. I regularly I enjoy getting these newsletters every now and then. So I would suggest the viewers of this channel do the same. Links will be located in the description below. Once again, Lior, thanks for helping us understand what's going on in the markets in regards to this today.
Thank you, sir, for having me.
We all want truth. The truth will set you free.